Hey everyone, and welcome back to Volunteer Friendly. This is episode 18, Is Conflict on a Team Good? Volunteer Friendly is a podcast that releases every Thursday at 10 a.m. Central for worship leaders, for musicians, tech directors, really anyone that's involved in making Sunday happen. Now, this is a little different than the rest of the content that I typically post. It's not highly technical. It's a 10-minute or less episode where we essentially discuss one topic, one question. I try to ask a question that's maybe slightly controversial, a question that really makes you think, and then we wrap up with 3 questions that force you to contemplate the answer to these, and then hopefully to discuss with your team. That's all that Volunteer Friendly is about. And I'm super enjoying these episodes. This is really fun. It's making me dig deep into things that we just do without thinking, things that maybe we should stop, things that I've seen done different ways at different churches, all with the goal of maybe causing a little bit of discomfort, all with the goal of making us ask why we do it in the first place and should we continue to do it, or at least discuss it with our team to land on how we approach it here at this place. So today, as I mentioned up top, we're talking about conflict. I really want to kind of ask the question, is conflict on a team good? I hear conflict talked about a few different ways. Oftentimes, particularly in a church where we deal with unity and we talk about the importance of unity so much. And as a staff, we should be unified. And as a church body, we should be unified and unified around doctrine and theology and the way we view things. And we should be supporting each other and unified in that. Often, I think we see conflict as a bad thing. And we think unity kind of means, sometimes we inadvertently think unity is this like utopian vision of the world where everyone gets along and everyone agrees and there's absolutely no conflict. And maybe that's what you view how it should be. And maybe that is how it should be. Again, a specific thing I try very hard not to do on the show is to make this a platform for my own ministry philosophy, to share my own opinions, which is very hard for me to do. And I try to not make value judgments about the things we're talking about, or value statements about the things we're discussing. I just try to throw out ideas and questions, kind of the Socratic method, to get you to really think, to ask questions, to do the 5 whys, to say, well, why do we do this? Yeah, because this. Well, then why? Well, because this. Well, then why? To get us to drill down, to really try to find the real true answer in this. So when it comes to conflict, again, sometimes I think we have this utopian vision to where there's no conflict on a team, but I compare that to, for instance, and this is not a specific church thing, but I compare this to what Ed Catmull shares in Creativity, Inc., a fantastic book, kind of behind the scenes look at Pixar and their creative team and forces, and they very much changed their leadership structure since then in their team. But Creativity Inc., Overcoming the Unseen Forces That Stand in the Way of True Inspiration. It's a fantastic book that Ed wrote. And one of the things he discussed is how much they value conflict and how they work through conflict. And you could think maybe you need to recast the word conflict because that feels too heavy to you. It feels too dark, too negative. Maybe it's just pushback. It's difference of opinions. When someone has a difference of opinion, when someone feels like their voice wasn't heard, when someone thinks, hey, we shouldn't do this, what happens in those moments? I think all of us would agree, even if you think the utopian vision of the world is that we all agree together and everyone works together and everything is beautiful. Even if you believe that, I think all of us agree that holding in your feelings and frustrations is not good, right? So if we feel like conflict is too heavy of a word and we feel like when there's conflict, something's wrong, well, the alternative can't be to hold that in. Again, I don't think any of us would agree with that. I don't think any of us would say, hey, well, the solution is just to hold things in and keep them to yourself. I think there has to be some sort of conflict. Now, typically we say, well, there's healthy conflict, unhealthy conflict. If that helps you work around this, and again, you're struggling with the idea of conflict, substitute a different word in there for you. But what I really want us to start thinking about, and we're going to get to our questions here in a second that I think help us unpack this a little bit more, is do we think it's good? Now, here's the reality. Whether you think it's good or not, it's going to happen. It's kind of like Murphy's Law. Like if something can and will go wrong, it will. Like if there's a possibility of something to go wrong, it will. That's kind of the Murphy's Law of conflict. Like if there are people working together, there will be conflict. So I think instead of saying the goal is no conflict, because the opposite of no conflict is no conversation and no people. And that's, as Christians, as believers, As people working in a church, even if it's a small church, you don't have a lot of people or you're working with volunteers, like we can't avoid working with people. So there will be conflict. We can call it good conflict, bad conflict, whatever it is. But when conflict arises, I think we have to have some sort of plan as to what to do. And again, hopefully the plan is not just to bury it and to stuff it away. It's going to happen. So let's talk about what happens when it does happen. Now, this is a perfect segue into our 3 questions. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, every single podcast episode, again, we post Thursday at 10 a.m. Central. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as YouTube. YouTube, you can see the video version. I try to end the episode with 3 questions. And the goal of these 3 questions is to give you content to process and to contemplate on your own, and then to discuss with your team. And I think this is going to be a particular episode that's important to discuss with your team, because I think it's an incredibly important topic. I've been on teams where this is handled well. I've been on teams where this isn't handled well. I've been on teams where I've been the problem with this and I've caused the conflict and I haven't handled it in a very healthy way. And I've been on teams where other people haven't handled it in a healthy way. But let's get to these questions. I think this is going to be a super important one. And please discuss this with your team. I should mention a way I've tried to make it really easy to do this is if you check the link in the show notes of this, in the description of this video, you'll find a link where you can go and download the processing questions from this week that will help you walk through and process, again, contemplate this stuff and then process it on your own with your team. Okay, so question number one, do you consider conflict on a team? It's going to happen, okay, but when it does happen, do you consider conflict on a team a sign of health or a call for help? Okay. Do you consider conflict on a team a sign of health or a call for help? I think there's ways to look at this where we go, if conflict is happening, then we're a healthy, living, breathing organism. We're a healthy team. Whereas some people think if there's conflict of any time, something is of any kind, there's something really, really wrong that we've got to get to the bottom of. I want you to really think through that on your own and then discuss that with your team. Question number 2, and again, this is important because we know conflict will arise. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So when conflict arises, question number 2, when conflict arises, how will you deal with it? How will your team deal with it? How will your staff deal with it? When conflict arises, how will you deal with it? I think it's super important that we set some boundaries of, these are times where as a leader, I'm going to ask you to do something or say, this is what we're doing. This is our vision. And I'm just going to need you to run with it. There's times where I want you to push back. I want you to disagree with me. And here's the way we're going to do that. Don't do that publicly in front of other people. Don't do that the day I announce it. Give me a day or whatever it is. This has to be contextualized to your environment, to your specific situation, but put some ground rules around that. And put some standards as to we're going to follow this, we're not going to follow that. Because I think it's much better to have a process in place and not ever have to use it than to not have a process in place and just everyone's feelings are constantly hurt because they constantly feel like people are pushing back on their ideas. Again, conflict is going to happen, but when conflict arises, how do you deal with it? Okay, question number 3. Again, this is maybe just as important as question number 2 is how should conflict between team members be handled? How should conflict between team members be handled? What's our process look like? Whether this is between volunteers on our worship team, volunteers on our production team, whether it's between leaders of our tech team and volunteers, whether it's between leaders of our tech team with each other. Maybe it's our staff team interacting with each other. Maybe it's our church pastors and elders dealing with congregants. When conflict arises between team members, how should that be handled? So question number 3, how should conflict between team members be handled? Again, I think it's super important that we lay this out. We discuss this with our team. We get their input. We get their feedback. But then ultimately there is a plan in place and everyone's clear. The expectations are clear. They're understood. They're agreed upon and everyone can roll and get happy and support that. Now, if you want these questions, click the link in the description of this video, in the show notes of this video to download a free PDF with these processing questions so that you can contemplate on your own and then finally discuss with your team. And as a reminder, post new episodes of Volunteer Friendly every Thursday, 10 a.m. Central. I'd love to see you back here, same exact place, wherever you're listening or watching this for next week's episode. Take care, everyone. See you on the next one. Bye.